Thank you very much, and it's really a thrill to be here at Enlighten Kitsap. This is just the sort of community event that I love to see, bringing people together around big ideas, and I've enjoyed a lot of previous talks here at Kitsap, Enlighten Kitsap. You may notice we don't have a microphone tonight, and my voice is not super strong. There are two seats up front, so you're welcome to move up here. If you still can't hear me, you can raise your hand, and then as a last resort, we may invite you to actually listen via Zoom in a different room. So that's what we've come up with as a workaround because we don't have microphones and I'm not a super loud speaker. But my hope is this will work out okay. So as was mentioned, I'm here to talk about what it means to be a good neighbor in Kitsap County. I didn't actually come from Kitsap County. I was born on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I went to a segregated school. I went to a place where people were working very hard just to get basic voting rights. I remember my parents going to protest, but I didn't really understand why. And I didn't really understand why there was only one African-American student in my classroom after segregation was finally nominally broken. And Black students were allowed to come to the white school, but certainly not encouraged to. The Eastern Shore of Maryland has a lot of history. That's where Frederick Douglass came from. It's where Harriet Tubman came from. It also has a history of vile racist violence, including 11 lynchings on the Eastern Shore, and a Confederate statue that remained in the courthouse, in the front of the courthouse for years, from around 1916, so well past the end of the Civil War, until I believe it was 2022, just a few years ago. Sort of a statement that it was so difficult to get it removed, sort of a statement of what the values of that community continue to be, although there's a lot of work on reparations and restoration. So what I want to talk to you about today is how do we go about addressing those kinds of issues? How do we go about addressing a legacy of harm that goes back hundreds of years? How do we go about addressing a history that was founded, a country that was founded on enslavement of human beings from Africa, enslavement that lasted for generations, and then racist violence that followed, and also from the legacy of taking land and resources from Native people and suppressing their culture? And legacies that have not just a momentary history, but have actually gone on for generations. My story on this was not that I came into this with the intention that I was going to figure this out. I sort of stumbled into this question. In the year 2000, I moved to the Suquamish Indian Reservation. I moved there because I found a cute little house that I liked and could afford. And so I moved in quite innocently, knowing that it was a reservation, but really not knowing much about it. So I went to the museum and learned a few things. I learned that the Port Madison Indian Reservation encompasses both Suquamish and Indianola. I saw where some of the historic sites are, where Suquamish people lived, which, as you can see from this map, extends well beyond the reservation boundaries. So here in Bremerton, there were a number of different sites, village sites, as well as families who lived here who actually continued to live here in Bremerton. I learned about Chief Seattle. Chief Seattle witnessed the arrival of Captain Vancouver at the age of 6, right off Restoration Point on Bainbridge Island. That was in 1792. That was probably the first contact in Puget Sound, or first recorded one. He signed the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1855. The treaty was what established the tribe's rights to hunt and fish in their usual and accustomed places, and their right to an education and healthcare, and also to the land of the reservation, the land that the reservation encompasses. He lived and died at a place called Old Man House, which was one of the largest longhouses in the whole Puget Sound region. There were a lot of tribes living here back in the day, but this house, it was built by his father and Chief Kitsap, was probably the largest. It was probably 600 to 900 feet long at its height. This is an artist's rendition, and it's certainly exaggerated and embellished. I don't think it was that big or that long, but it gives you a sense of the architecture and a sense of the use of that house, that longhouse, as a place for potlatches, which would attract people from all over the region. Chief Seattle died in 1866, and after he passed away, the Indian agent decided that the house should be burned down. So that's what happened. This is the only photograph I know of that actually records a part of the longhouse. It's the last remaining beam that didn't fall in the fire. And as you can see, people didn't abandon the site because it was the heart of their village and their community and their tribe. Instead, they rebuilt their community there, built houses, their cemetery, the church, and resumed their lives. In 1904, though, the U.S. military decided that they needed to protect the Bremerton shipyards, and to do it, they needed the entire waterfront of Suquamish. So they took 70 acres, including this lot, but much more. And people were then dispersed around the reservation. And in many respects, that and the fact that this was a time during the boarding school era where a lot of children were being forcibly removed from their homes. This was really what the tribal leaders consider a low point in their history. So that was 1904. The military didn't actually build fortifications for the Bremerton shipyards. They also didn't, by the way, take the land across Agate Passage, which was Bainbridge Island. That land was not taken. What they did do is they sold it to a developer. The developer made it into lots. Those lots went up for sale. This was Chief Seattle Park. They advertised it as this great place that had this Indian heritage who were previously living here. They also, as I mentioned, they dispersed people to separate allotments. At this point, they were breaking up the reservation into private land holdings among Native people, who then often lost the land because they might not be able to pay the steep property taxes, being subsistence fishermen. They may got cheated out of the land. So a lot of land was leaving the control of the tribe at that point. So I was one of the people who bought one of those houses, not really knowing the history, that one of those houses that is now was being advertised as a lovely little vacation spot. And the covenants for all of this plat had this language that the occupancy and ownership shall be restricted to persons of the Caucasian race. When I bought my house, I didn't see that, because when I looked back later, I saw there was a whiteout. So somebody had actually erased it, but one of my neighbors showed me her version, which where it was very clear. So my first experience with my neighbors, as it said, these were only Caucasians allowed in this neighborhood. So in fact, my neighbors were Caucasians for the most part. And one of them knocked on my door. I thought, oh, the welcome wagon, this is great. And it wasn't the welcome wagon, it was people organizing to stop the tribe from building housing in our neighborhood, because we didn't want people like that living near us. And they held a big meeting at the local church, the UCC church. I went to the meeting, pretty uncomfortable about actually showing up, but I felt like if I don't, then they're speaking for me, because I live on that street. This is Angeline Avenue in Suquamish. Went to the meeting. There was one person after another trying to get the county commissioner to prohibit this housing project from going in, and explaining in all sorts of ways why we didn't want those people living near us. Finally, I got up my nerve to say something about, of course, we would welcome people who welcomed settlers. When settlers first arrived, it was the Native people who took care of them in so many ways. And of course, we would consider them neighbors and welcome them in our neighborhood. And then I decided maybe I'd leave the meeting early because I was really uncomfortable. And so I left, and somebody followed me out. And it turned out there was a tribal elder who'd been listening to the whole thing, which was so embarrassing to realize that he had heard all of that. And he thanked me for speaking up, and he said, but don't worry, we got a great legal department. And sure enough, if you drive from the casino to downtown Suquamish, you see a little street that's called We One Way. Not many people know that's why that name. So along with trying to stop this housing project, they were also actually suing to disband the tribe, to say that the tribe did not have the legal right to exist. So this was a extremely hostile group of folks who were landowners and wanted to have all the privileges of land like on Bainbridge Island, but didn't want to recognize that they were actually on a reservation. So shortly after this meeting, Chief Seattle's grave was desecrated. So this is 2001. Chief Seattle's grave was desecrated. The gravestone was knocked over and broken. A newspaper article about the housing project was found nearby. They never found out who did it. But at the time, again, I was pretty new in this town, and I expected the normal human rights folks were going to step up and then I'd get in behind them, and that wasn't happening. It was just, except for the tribe itself, the tribal leaders trying to come to terms with the repair and the hurt of this event, there was nobody saying anything. So finally, I called the people I knew and got back a hold of the elder, whose name is Ted George. He introduced me to some of the elders in the tribe, as well as the elected leaders. And we held a big meeting at the church to talk about, how can we do better than this? This is not okay. Out of that came an organization called Suquamish Olala Neighbors. Some of you may have heard of it. Some of you were involved in it. And we did a number of things. We worked on educating ourselves, because one of the things we realized for the non-natives among us, this was a native, non-native group, was that a lot of us didn't actually know much about the tribe, its history, its sovereignty. We worked on building relationships, because again, those relationships between tribal members and non-tribal folks was not well established. We showed up during times when they were being verbally assaulted by the neighbors at public events. And we'd show up and say, well, these folks have their opinion, but they don't represent the non-native community. They were projecting themselves as, we non-natives believe blah, blah, blah. And so we'd show up in larger numbers and say, well, actually, we don't. And then we did something that Ted George recommended we do. Ted and I became co-chairs during the early days. And Ted said, too many people are telling us we're broken, and we need to start celebrating our heroes. We need to celebrate the people who are bringing us together. So we began having a series of potlucks in which we raised up the people who were doing really good work for the community. The only fundraising we ever did was to raise enough money to give them a gift. We talked about how great they were and how much we appreciated them. And it was really fun. And it also helped, again, with building those relationships between the tribe and the non-tribal community, because each time we'd celebrate people both inside and not in the tribe. So that's a picture of Ted and me. We had a good time being co-chairs, and I learned so much from him. I could go on and on about how many different ways that he guided our group throughout that process. So this is Old Man House again, and the reason I put the slide back in is because after we had formed for a while and done that work, the tribe came to us and asked if we would work with them on getting Old Man House Park returned. So Old Man House Park was 3 of the lots that had not gone to private developers. The state had held on to them in recognition of the historic importance of those lots. And the tribe had wanted them back forever. I mean, it was where their longhouse was. It was a spiritual center of their community. So over a couple of years, a number of us, including I'm sure people in this room who were part of that, worked very hard. The same neighbors who'd opposed us and everything else opposed this. They offered to take care of the park on behalf of the neighborhood, to do historic interpretations, which struck me as being a little like asking the KKK to interpret MLK's birthplace. And eventually that notion was dismissed, and eventually at a packed Washington State Parks Commission meeting in Port Angeles, we got a unanimous vote to return the park. This picture is taken like moments after the decision was made, when the tribal members just broke out into song and drumming. And I'm just going to run through a very few pictures that show the celebration that took place a year later when the deed was actually returned. This young woman is holding the copy of the deed in her hands as they paddle back to the old tribal center. So lots of good things have come out of this return. It strengthened the tribe's resolve to reclaim their culture. They built this longhouse in honor of and influenced by Old Man House. It's now called the House of Awakened Culture. Many of you may have gone to events there. This picture is taken during the annual canoe journey. For me, it was one of the best moments of my life, and it's had these long-term effects. Being part of the Suquamish Foundation board, for example, and going on a canoe journey, paddling with them every year for like the last 12 years. So the question that I was left with is people would say, well, so what worked and what didn't work and why? And I didn't really have a good answer for that. I mean, I could say we did certain things. We were always respectful to the tribe and we took their leadership because on their reservation, we believed that they did have sovereignty and we weren't going to do anything without them. And we did a lot of work to educate ourselves. But really, I didn't really have a sort of strategy or analysis of what it takes to make this work. At the same time, I was working at Yes Magazine, as was mentioned. We founded it in 1996 on Bainbridge Island. It was based on the idea of looking for ways to a more just and sustainable and compassionate world. So we were doing articles from all over the country about people who were doing similar work in various different settings of working to heal old wrongs and make things better. And then in 2016, I took a 12,000-mile journey around the United States to do some of my own reporting, because up till then, I'd mostly reported from my desk. So I got this little pickup truck and camper. I decided I wanted to have it be more colorful than just the boring white it was when I bought it. So I asked some of the my tribal member friends if they would paint it, and I expected what was up in the upper left-hand corner there, something kind of small and something that Kate Avacana, who's pictured here, would do. And then I came in to see how it was going, and her boyfriend was there. And he says, "Don't worry, we're going to paint the whole thing." And they did. Unfortunately, he's an amazing artist, Tom Villa, who he has a mural. He and Kate have a mural at the Sylvan branch of the library, if you haven't seen it yet. So this took me around the country. I wrote a book about it, which you're welcome to check out at Southside. But once again, I was collecting stories of economic justice, racial justice, environmental justice, and how people in these different parts of the world, the country, including places I didn't normally get to, in the Rust Belt and Appalachia and Indian reservations, places that are sort of out of the normal places that I had been going, mostly on the coasts, admittedly. We're doing amazing things, and I really wanted to capture those stories. So just a few examples of some of the stories we covered. We did an interview with Bishop Desmond Tutu about the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission and what did and didn't work about that. We did an issue called Make It Right, about what it actually takes to begin healing. I went to Standing Rock, spent a total of about 5 weeks there reporting on what was taking place there as people were trying to stop the pipeline. So then in 2020, the Racial Equity Advisory Committee was formed. My colleague, Darrell Riley, was on that as well. It was decided by a vote of 5-2 of Bremerton City Council. It was made up of 2 to 3 council members, and the purpose was to find ways the city could become more inclusive and responsive on addressing racial justice. So once I was appointed to be on that, I started learning about Bremerton's Black history and learned that there was a huge population increase of African Americans during the war because of the hiring that went on associated with the war effort. And there was also a lot of backlash. There was a union, at least one, that would not admit women and Blacks. There are racial covenants on homes like the ones in Suquamish. There are whites only signs around Bremerton, and people refusing to serve Blacks in area businesses. And there was random violence where people were just getting attacked on the street. Lillian Walker, a founder of the NAACP, said Bremerton was a white supremacist town. I'd never experienced anything in Illinois like we encountered when we came here. Black families were mainly steered to Sinclair Park, which, if you don't know, is the area up above the Auto Center area where the big car dealerships are, and it became a community with deep bonds and deep cultural ties. There was a community center there that was a real social and civic hub, and that's where Quincy Jones first found a piano and fell in love with music as a child. It was the home to the NAACP, founded in 1943. But after the war, the neighborhood was essentially demolished. I mean, it was actually literally demolished. It hadn't belonged to the African-American families that were there. So I'm not sure if it was the military or the city, actually literally picked up the houses and shipped them elsewhere and knocked things down.
Was that so the freeway could go through?
Well, I was trying to find that out, and I don't know if that was the case. I don't think it was the only. So if you go to Quincy Square now, I mean, one real tribute to Bremerton is the fact that Quincy Square has, first of all, celebrated this wonderful African-American hero, but also that they've put in these kiosks so that you can actually learn a good chunk of this history just by spending the time to go looking at each of those kiosks. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about the current status of African-Americans, except to say that home ownership has actually been declining among African-Americans since 1980. It was at about 45% of African-Americans owned their own home, and now it's at 34%. So what the Racial Equity Advisory Committee did is we held, this was right during the pandemic, we were concerned that a lot of businesses were going to go out of business, and particularly businesses owned by African Americans and other people of color. So we organized a business forum to try to find ways that those businesses could be supported. And KETA kept going with additional forums after we disbanded. We also had a series of community conversations. We reached out to community leaders from Bremerton. We interviewed them to find out what their main concerns were. And here's some of the priorities. I'm not going to read them all to you, but they're what you'd expect in terms of wanting greater representation, a robust hiring process, having city leaders get out into the community and talk to people more equitable engagement methods. So a number of things that seem really common sense, but were not actually taking place, according to the leaders that we interviewed. One thing that did, I can't speak to whether any of these recommendations were followed through on, except for there was a recommendation by some to hire a full-time equity and official for the city, and that did in fact occur. And Janice Briggs is now the Diversity and Community Engagement Manager. So I've been doing this various kinds of work, but I still didn't really have a strategy. Like what works to really reckon with this kind of racist legacy that can apply elsewhere? Because people would sometimes ask me, you know, what does it actually take for a community to do this kind of work so that it really moves the needle on racial injustice? It really does some repair. Oh, that's right. I have to stay near the microphone because we're on Zoom. The opportunity to do that analysis came up when I was asked to write a chapter of a Routledge handbook on creative futures. And my first thought when they asked me if I would do that was to think, you know, I don't think we can have a creative future unless we deal with some repair from the past. So I spent some time really thinking about what that would look like and came up with a rubric, which is what's incorporated in that little zine that I'm giving out outside. And it's basically the notion that there are these 4 steps, and they don't necessarily always come in order, but they're all necessary at some point, starting with stop the harm. If there's active harm going on, it's a good idea to stop it. Tell the truth, reveal what happened, tell the history, find out. A lot of times we don't know, so part of our job is then to find out and then to share that truth. Acknowledge what happened, and if appropriate, apologize. And then do repair. You know, one of the things about the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa and elsewhere is they do a really good job of lifting up the truth, but then it kind of sort of hangs there. It's like, okay, now we know what harm was created by apartheid, or what harm was created in Canada when children were taken forcibly from their Indigenous family homes and into these abusive schools. So yes, we've learned now in the truth and reconciliation process about the harm, but there's this other step, which is the repair step or the reparation step. that too often gets missed. So a lot of, if you take a look at the zine, I devoted a fair amount of that to examples of what reparations look like or what repair looks like. Here are some of the examples. Returning land, like Old Man House Park, is a tangible form of repair. Free tuition or job training, renaming a street or a building, particularly if the existing name is offensive. Legacy funds for descendants. That was something Georgetown University did when they decided to grapple with the fact that they had sold 272 of their enslaved people to pay off a debt. And then later there's a story, the full stories, or the abbreviated full stories in the zine, but later decided because of pressure from students and alumni that yes, they really did need to do something about that. Assure harms will not be repeated. And this process of reparations has happened in the past. It's not something that is this wild, crazy idea. So, I mean, sometimes people say, well, how could we possibly repair the damage of generations of enslavement? Well, that's a big ask, but you can do things locally. You can take steps, and taking some steps is better than taking no steps. So I want to just say a few things about why I've chosen to work on this question of reckoning. One is that I inherited things that everyone should have access to. This little bingo card is in the zine, and it's just a few things that white folks, honestly, including my family, kind of take for granted. My dad got to go to college on the GI Bill. Another relative had a run-in with police having drugs. She didn't go to jail. An African-American, especially under the Rockefeller drug laws, would have been likely to go to jail. The kind of mentoring or career connections are often through the old boys club. White folks tend to get them. Often African-Americans are left out. And a second one is I would just want to live in a thriving and connected community. I just want to live in a place where people are doing well. As Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And a third one is more political, which is that we are often subject to a divide and conquer politics. As long as we're divided, we have a much harder time getting the basics of the things that we deserve and need. Here's what Lyndon Johnson said about that in his kind of crass way. So we all benefit from doing this work, I believe, and for other reasons as well. We get rid of the notion that some are more deserving than others, which is poisoning our culture and has for generations, and also justifies American exceptionalism, that somehow we are entitled to a stance globally because of some kind of attribute that goes along with being European or white. We're far better off during disasters. And this is a very practical question. If there is a big earthquake and everything falls apart, do you want to be in good communications with your neighbors who may have other skills and other assets than you do? And maybe together you can make something work that you couldn't on your own. And then we can live in integrity with our nation's values of liberty and justice. So instead of this constant sense, at least a sense that I always have when I hear liberty and justice for all, I always go, really? All? And wouldn't it be great if we could say that and really mean it? It really is liberty and justice for all and not have that hesitation. What reckoning is not, I think a lot of people worry about it being a time when they're going to be subjected to blame and shame. So the purpose is not to create blame and shame. And I think there's a lot of fear that if we actually open ourselves to this conversation, we're going to feel bad. And I've found the opposite to be true. Once I start really reckoning with it, I feel like I'm taking steps forward in a good way that feels very healing. The purpose is not to punish even people who benefited. And it's not a one and done process. It's not as though you can do one good deed or one repair enterprise and then say, okay, now we're done. It's something that takes, I believe is going to take the rest of my life. I'll be working on this. It's going to take many iterations because the damage took generations to create. It's not going to be done overnight, but that doesn't mean we don't embark on that process. So one last story, as many of you know, Bremerton is currently facing a situation where a lot of our immigrant neighbors, business owners, family breadwinners, kids being separated from families, a lot of our immigrant neighbors are being either arrested and detained or are in fear, living in fear of that outcome. And the stories are just heartbreaking. One thing I think about when I think about this is that back when Martin Luther King was going on speaking tours, he often found that a lot of people refused to have him speak, including at Black churches. People thought he was too radical. And then in retrospect, everyone was like, oh yeah, I was totally down with that. I'm all about Martin Luther King, you know. But in the moment, so this is one of those moments, you know, are we going to stand up for these folks? Because this is the moment when they are most at risk. So we have an organization. Oh, and yeah, let me just say one other thing about the truth-telling part of this. A lot of people who are most at risk here in Bremerton are from Guatemala originally. And you may wonder, why did so many people leave Guatemala? Well, at least part of the reason may go back to 1954 when the US government overthrew their democratically elected government. The reason they overthrew them was because the United Fruit Company had a bunch of land and was making a bunch of money off of produce, but they also had a whole bunch of unused land. And there were a lot of very impoverished people in Guatemala who had no place to farm. So the government said, we would like to take that land from you. We'll pay you for it, what you said it was worth on your last tax statement. So we're not just grabbing it, we're paying for it, but we would like to turn this land over to people who will farm it. The United States was not having it, and the government was overthrown with the help of the CIA. And that provoked a series of massacres, a civil war, and what the UN Truth Commission has labeled a genocide against indigenous people. So if you wonder why there's so many Guatemalan folks in Bremerton, I can't tell you the exact link from those things, but I can tell you that this is a country that was deeply embedded in violence for generations. And part of that was anyone who tried to build any kind of economic stability, whether through a union or through cooperatives, was in grave danger of showing up dead. So here in Bremerton, we have many of you know the Kitsap Immigrant Assistance Center. I think your last speaker was from there. So that is amazing that resource exists here. We also have a small group of us who've just formed the Bremerton Immigrant Solidarity Community. We work in various ways to serve as a witness, to help support families of detained immigrants, and to accompany immigrants to hearings. On the next first Friday, we're going to have a little slushy social where we make slushies and we invite you to come learn how you can get involved. It will be at Ashley's Pub. If you have any interest, you're welcome to just show up or to email us at this email address. And this is the zine that I created that tried to encapsulate what I just described, those 4 steps that's part of that STAR process, the stop the harm, tell the truth, apologize or acknowledge, and restore and repair. So the zine is outside. I decided to do it for free because I'm retired and I can. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And then I realized this thing is expensive to print. So I'm accepting donations to cover the printing, but you don't have to. Just take it if you just want it. And that is that.
I attended an event at the Bainbridge High School. I think it was sometime between 1988 and 1992, called Honor Your Mother, where the Suquamish tribe apologized to the Filipino women and gave each ancestral woman who came a rhododendron bush. And do you know how that figures into this whole awakening is happening at the Suquamish tribe?
Well, there's a long history of Filipino work, sorry, there's a long history of I'm sorry, I should repeat the question for Zoom. There's a question about the relationship between the Suquamish tribe and the Filipinos, especially on Bainbridge. And I don't know about that event that was happened before I moved here, but there is a long history between the Filipino workers who came to Bainbridge, especially after the Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. And they weren't allowed to bring wives, and so many of them ended up marrying Suquamish people.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about an apology associated with that.
You know how they hooked into that, the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could you please repeat the information about what's happening at Ashley's Pub? When exactly is it going to happen?
You know, I should have had that in front of me, but it's the first Friday art walk that always happens downtown Bremerton.
In September.
Yeah, so I think that's the second or third or no, it's the fourth, I think. Somebody who has a calendar can help me. Fourth.
At what time? Is it just like?
I'll look it up.
Thank you.
The website, we'll put it on the website.
Yeah, and also this organization, the Bremerton Immigrant Solidarity Community now has both a Facebook and a Instagram page. So it's also there.
Already part of kayak.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about not having that right at hand.
Where is Ashley's Pub? Right downtown, it's just on Pacific, it's right around the corner, then you go down the steps.
It's right across from Quincy Square.
Right across from, yeah. If you go to Dallas Works, you just go down the steps from Dallas Works. Thank you.
Mhm.
There's some questions, there's some comments here from the chat. One of them is reparations. You said there's reparations, but you forgot all the white people who had reparations, because when they freed in the Caribbean, they freed England freed the slaves in the English colonies. I better just talk longer so that the Zoom can hear me too. When they gave the English people, the white English people, reparations for every slave that they freed, the English person paid them for the slave.
That's correct. I listed that, but I didn't have a chance to unpack it here. President Lincoln freed enslaved people in Washington, D.C. before the proclamation, and he compensated the slave owners.
Are there other questions here? Otherwise, I'll take one from there. Another thing you said was you should educate city leaders, and that is a really big deal, because, for example, they've been invited to these, and they could have heard you tonight, and nobody from the city government did come, even though I've extended an invitation to them, just FYI. So we've got to do something about, the whole city council could be coming to these things, but they don't.
Fair enough.
Now somebody from here, you want to say? Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing on this, especially if we're in a political environment right now that seems to be turning away from. See, and a heartening example that my wife and I kind of been following, and you may probably already know about it, but it's called Greenwood Rising down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's from the Tulsa massacre, Black Wall Street, and they put together a really good program to unite community, and that's a really kind of a good story that's happening. So
Yes, thank you for that.
your work.
And thank you for that that note about Greenwood. Yeah.
I'm Diana, and you showed a picture of Boone and Emily earlier. There was a mom and a dad and their grown daughter. She's gonna bring it up. I am having a very small, this is a drop in the bucket, to help them with their legal expenses. Kebab dinner in Paulsville on Sunday the 30th. If they're interested in donating or attending, I have a few more seats left. Can you see?
Can you explain what happened?
Okay,
Maybe, do you know what happened to them? The people in the picture there?
Yeah, I do, but you probably know more if you want to,
That's why then.
but Zoom,
you
Well,
have a microphone.
okay. So, Boone Morisseth is from Laos. He came to the United States when he was 5 years old as part of the outcome of the Vietnam War. He's lived in the United States ever since then. He had a fairly routine illegal activity that took place when he was a teenager. It wasn't erased from his record, although it should have been because he was so young at the time. And it's followed him along. So for 30 years, he's had to check in with ICE I believe it's every month, which he's done religiously. And at a recent one, tell me if I'm wrong, but at a recent one, he was detained.
He was detained, he's out now, he cannot work. But I believe the day before yesterday, there was a hearing to determine whether he would get permission to work. And I haven't got the latest news on that, but
Okay.
he even didn't spend that much of time in Laos. He was in a refugee camp in Thailand
Okay.
before they came to Alaska. And the routine teenage thing he did, and I have brothers who grew up in Alaska, that could have been my brothers with their friends.
That's right.
He was driving the car and a passenger shot a gun outside the window. There was no property damage made, so there was no human damage. And he was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong guy. But for this to happen, it's just, it crossed my mind. My brother,
That's right.
my brother wasn't born in Laos.
We can also have a discussion type of things later on in the foyer. So when you can share your experiences there also. Yes.
I was just wondering if you know about any pushback that's happening from the current administration because they're trying to stop all these DEI programs. And, you know, you talked about things that are being done here in Bremerton, trying to get more equity and I just was wondering, has the federal government tried to stop us?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody else does. I do know that when Mayor Wheeler was preparing to hire his DEI officer, he initially backed off because of his fear that it would have repercussions. But in the end, he did go ahead and renamed it community engagement and something else. I can't remember how he framed it exactly, but yeah, please.
So the race equity advisory committee that was shared, that was what was 2019. So when we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, that was acceptable. We are seen as nonprofits and actually there has been changing of language so that federal funding still be received. So nonprofits are feeling a little bit of the strap. I see it. We're not really talking about inclusion, diversity. We're saying belonging. There's other things in which we. So fortunately, Kitsap Strong, Washington Student Achievement Council, Regional Challenge Grant. There was some legislation that allowed for funding to address equity. So we have something. We have funding coming through from the state because it's in the legislation to advance equity, but it's something
Someone, thank you very much for that. One more question for you. In your bingo chart, some of those inequities also refer to person just said poor people. It's not just racial differences, but poor people, and that is becoming more and more at this country. There's more and more poor people.
Yes, thank you. I absolutely agree that is affecting impoverished people across the board. So I think we have to, you have to remember that both are happening at the same time. So for example, if you are an African-American farmer, a poor farmer, the chances that you were going to get a loan to make it through a bad year were close to zero for many years, and a poor white farmer would get the loan. So both is true, that right now there's a lot of low-income people who are suffering, and middle-class people are increasingly insecure. And part of the reason that I think this work is so important is because this divide has been used to keep us from getting together. It's like the whole welfare queen notion was basically saying to low-income white people, you're not like them, you're better, so therefore it's okay to take away the safety net. Well, we've got to undercut that notion. We're in this together. Yeah, Daryl.
Well, I got a question and comment. Firstly, I think our governor and lieutenant governor, they have quite a few lawsuits against the federal government, so there is pushback from Washington. My question to you is, I need to know how much you need for your print, so that we can help my nonprofit and willing to help. I also want to say that oftentimes, like if you're trying to find the information, but you're actually burying your head under a rock. And here's an example. Gary, Indiana had a storm of 99 miles an hour 12 days ago. The whole city has been without power for 10 days, and it's 85% black. Right? So what about FEMA? What about the natural things that you all pay for on your retirement, on your paychecks that go towards these things? So it's still happening. It's just going to take us to stand up and call those things out, and become more informed, make it your business. As far as the poor situation is concerned, we offer financial literacy to our youth. We have to figure out how to do it differently, or we'll be talking about this again. So,
What is your charity?
it's a nonprofit. It's actually, we don't have to worry about DEI because our name says DEI. It's called the Uproot Slavery Initiative, named after a book by Booker T. Washington. And to your point, how we got there, we realized how people were emancipated in 1865. And in less than 50 years, we had Black Wall Street. So we're not approaching it from a victim standpoint. We're empowered enough to understand access is about information first. So we approach it from that space.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this back and forth here. And the Zoom audience, we're not going to repeat everything for the Zoom audience because we'll just cut this part out and we'll say you have to be here to talk. Also, if it's no more questions right now, we can adjourn to the foyer. You can have a drink or something. Yes, you.
I just wanted to say that I love Yes Magazine.
Oh, thank you.
And it was a long time subscriber. Are you not doing the magazine anymore?
No, yes, well, I left in 2016. But it folded, and actually I went to work for the tribe for a number of those years, as a communications manager. But yes, folded last year, and the finances just weren't working out. And so the current board negotiated with Truth Out to take over the archives. And so they're making sure that they stay online and available. And they're also sending out a monthly newsletter with both old Yes content, but also current articles in the idea of Yes. And oftentimes they reference the things that I've been writing, which I really appreciate.
So, Truth.
Thank you.
Truth Out. Do you want to tell people here what Truth Out is?
Truthout.org. It's a website. It's free. It's a progressive news site. They update daily with really great progressive journalism.
Truth Out, did you say?
Truthout.org.